one of the things that's happened in terms of information these days is understanding trauma in terms of it being transgenerational and how it impacts us clinicians in terms of understanding the clients that we serve, particularly clients of color. And particularly African Americans. So when we talk about trauma, we're talking about a deeply distressing situation or experience. Transgenerational trauma is the psychological impact of a collective trauma that is experienced by a group of people. So whereas we're going to talk about people of color, particularly those indigenous Blacks to America who have ancestors who were enslaved, we can also talk about transgenerational trauma for those who were victims of sex abuse, rape, human trafficking, the Holocaust, and those who are survivors of the Armenian genocide exacted by the Turks. But here, for Bergen County's sake, we're going to talk about it in terms of the impact it has here and understanding it for clinicians. How do we understand when a child manifests anger and grief, or an adolescent shows signs of low self-esteem, or angry outbursts? We always look at the behavior instead of looking at what's behind it. And we know that for a lot of families, there are many generations of keeping secrets about incest that might have gone on, and also for generations carrying the burden of what happened to a group of people here who were enforced to labor in this country and were demeaned all along the way. And given the image that they were less of value, but their labor was not rewarded, and they were not able to make the same gains in this country. That has an impact from generation to generation when families aren't able to improve their economic status. So that's an impact of transgenerational trauma. You can't make an impact in terms of protecting your families. Many men have suffered from witnessing how their women were abused and their children taken away. And we sort of not think about it in terms of it happened a long time ago, but these things get embedded. And I think Dr. Walsh probably knows better than I, but we now know the neurobiology of trauma is not just the outward manifestations and behavior, but there is some research that shows the change in the brain, the neurobiology of the brain, the three parts of the brain, the thinking brain, the midbrain, and the forebrain. And two areas that are impacted by trauma long-term is the amygdala, which is our fight or flight reflex, and the hippocampus, which is our memory. So our emotional memory is tied up. We also know that it's epigenetic, meaning that when we see these things happening, there's a physiological response to trauma long-term. And so families carry this forward in terms of, and manifested by diseases like high blood pressure or obesity or diabetes, because it gets embedded and encoded in our genes, and we now know it's passed on from generation to generation. So it's not just the behavior we see, but the long-term impact on us physiologically as well as psychological. So clinicians, I think the other question I was asked, and I'm wrapping it up, was that how can clinicians help clients? Most African Americans are coming to therapy because they have some knowledge about something happening to them, so they're aware. So my suggestion is that clinicians learn more about and become more culturally sensitive, such as attending things like this, to be able to understand what they are looking at when they see a client who's faced with, rage or anger or overwhelming grief. That it's really tied into some physical manifestation as well as a psychological manifestation. So most clients want to talk about it in some form or fashion. So I think it behooves clinicians to be more culturally aware and sensitive to the kinds of history the client brings into the therapy session.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rodgers. And I know we're going to